Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going big.
Really big.
Because we're going to be constructing the ultimate $3,000 gaming PC. This is a heck of a lot of money. Granted, obviously there are going to be some compromises along the way because of stupid things like RAM and SSDs. That is obviously the whole point of me, because we can go through and show you all of the ins and the outs, how to create something that is going to be truly exceptional, but most importantly, show you what $3,000 actually gets you. So we're going to be walking you through how to put this together, all of the components that are hot, all of the components that are certainly not, and then of course at the end of the video we're going to show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you can see exactly what $3,000 will get you for your cold hard cash. It's going to be a really exciting video. I can't wait to show you everything that we've got, so stay tuned right after a short word from this video's sponsor. PC Specialist is your go-to place to get your dream gaming PC. Renowned as a leading custom PC builder in Europe, PC Specialist excels in producing quality computers, freeing you from the stress of a DIY. Build and customize your perfect system with ease using the accessible configurator, or choose from one of their pre-built systems and get delivery as quick as the very next day. To find out more about this system, or to create your own, just hit that link down below to head to PC Specialist. Rightio then folks, where on earth should we start? Hopefully by not dropping our heavy power supply on the floor, and I'm gonna begin actually by talking about the graphics card, because as we talked about in the last video we did, PC gaming is a really weird place where some components are getting really expensive and others, I think as a result of the fact that the key ones are getting more expensive, are actually getting a fair bit cheaper. So if you're looking in the right sort of price bracket and you may be browsing for like a 5060 PC, then assuming you've already got a RAM and SSD, actually you can build something that's very, very affordable. At this end of the market though, sadly not going to be the case. Case in point is this. It's an RTX 5080. This is supposed to be around about $1,000. This is one from Palette, but obviously the one we're pricing up is basically the cheapest 5080 that you can get your hands on, is going to set you back around about $1,300. So about $300 more just for the graphics card. Then we actually have our SSD. I mean, it seems that actually a Samsung 990 Pro is one of the few that you can get, but you're looking around about $200 plus for one of these, which is an extra $100 plus essentially to what it used to be. And then obviously you've got RAM, and this is one of the cheaper kits, only $360. But again, case in point, if you added the extra money from all of these components together, you're looking at what, $500–600 more for the exact same thing versus last year. But you're probably bored of me saying that really. So let's move on to some of the better news. If you buy a gaming PC now, you can get a slightly faster chip. So this is the fastest gaming CPU pretty much on the planet. This is the 9850 X3D. It is essentially an overclocked version of the 9800 X3D, but hey, it is slightly faster on our benchmarks. You can find this in the top right corner of your screen. So it is going to be the best 5080 PC we've ever built. Hooray. Now, in order to actually start constructing something, of course, we are going to need our motherboard. If this was last year, we'd probably be looking at an X870E motherboard, but the good news is you can step it down to B850, and it's basically going to make no real difference to your gaming PC. Certainly in terms of gaming performance, you might miss out some extra features and some future-proofing, but for like 99% of people, I don't actually think you're really going to notice much of a difference. So this is one from ASUS. This is just under $200 or £200, about 180, 190 or so, but current pricing on all of these components is listed down below if you want to check out more information, or obviously just check the pricing. So this is going to be a great way to, again, I don't want to say save money, this is a $3,000 gaming PC, but let's say claw some of it back. So it's jet black, it's got decent cooling on the VRMs, you've still got like support for M.2 SSDs, PCI Generation 5, things like that, Wi-Fi support, but it's just not like crazily overbuilt and it doesn't have a load of extra features built on top of it. So that's going to do a good job. But let's seal our box back up, then we can pick up our motherboard and drop this down. It's ready to receive our 8-core CPU. This obviously is the main compromise. We are going for, well, a 98 or a 9850 X3D, but personally speaking, I actually use an 8-core 7800 X3D in my personal editing PC for obviously editing all of these videos, and actually it works absolutely fine because it's mainly the graphics card for us that's kind of doing all of the heavy lifting, but obviously it depends what you're using your gaming PC for. So if you need more CPU cores, then you could look at like an Intel Ultra 9 for best price performance, or if you want to stick with X3D, then you're looking at the far more expensive 9950 X3D that comes with 16 cores, but obviously is better for productivity performance. Once your CPU is installed though, you can then play a little bit of a game. I like to call it, what's more upsetting? Pricing on RAM or pricing on SSDs? My winner probably is going to be RAM, because this is roughly around about $370–380. I will say that you can get some deals from time to time, if you know where to look, that will often be a little bit cheaper than this, but don't go expecting the good old days of like 120 quid for some sticks of DDR5, because clearly that is at least a year out. We can pray, we can hope, but we don't know when things are going to change. But this is running at 6,000 megahertz. It has an expo profile, which should help us to get that full rated speed. But obviously you just want to line this up with slots 2 and 4 and then push it down into position so you get a nice audible click. Then it's just a case of grabbing a small Phillips crosshead screwdriver and then undoing this little M.2 slot. I always advise using the topmost slot because you're going to get the best bandwidth, the best rated speed. So just unscrew that until it removes. There will be a little bit of a plastic peel you need to take off, but I've obviously used this motherboard before, so I don't need to do that. Then you can pick up your SSD, and to be fair, the 990 Pro probably on balance is the drive I would go for on my own personal gaming PC. They're really good. They have a little cache as well, so in terms of sustained performance, they're really good whether you're reading or writing. Typically, this is just going to be if you've got really fast internet and you're downloading like multiple games on like Epic and Steam at the same time. This is when you're going to notice a big performance difference really between a really cheap SSD and a really expensive one. But generally speaking, you're paying a lot of money for this, but at least you are getting a very high quality product. And then, ladies and gentlemen, your motherboard is pretty much ready to go. Obviously, if you want to put a big air cooler on this, then you can. I always think that actually in terms of price performance, it's the best way to go, but I understand if you're spending £3,000 of dollars on a system, you probably want something that is a little bit more attractive. That is why, in terms of cooling, we're actually going for this. Now, again, we've saved ourselves a little bit of money. You might be tempted to go for like a Corsair Titanium or something with an LCD, and that costs like $200, $250 or so. But this is around about 100. It's still going to have awesome performance. It's going to keep it cool, going to keep it quiet, but we're not going to, I don't want to say wasting money, but we're spending our money on the performance of the system rather than like fancy LCDs or effects or things like this. So this is the GA2 Lite 360 RGB from Lee. And we just want to open up this little box. And I don't actually think I've used this before because it's brand new in the packaging. And I'm really pleased to say actually that this one has the fans pre-mounted, which always helps. But it's not actually to do with the cooler itself per se. It's more about the mounting system, because on your motherboard, you'll probably need to remove these default AM5 kind of brackets that you have on here and replace it with something else that comes with your cooler. And it's much easier to do this now before you put it in your case, just so you don't have to kind of fiddle around or potentially put your motherboard in, realize you made a mistake and just take it straight back out again. So let's have a look then. How is this going to mount? Looks like we have our Intel backplate that obviously we're not going to need, but then we do have these AMD brackets here. So let's get this ready by removing our protective film. We remove the 4 screws from the motherboard itself, and then these plastic brackets should just come off like so. Then we can replace them with the Lee & ones. We then use those same silver screws to get this fitted down. But right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to say with that on a little hey. Shall we just keep that in the edit? Yes. With that out of the way, it is probably time that we pressed on to our case, and I'm actually incredibly excited about this.
I've got a stern face.
I actually am, because this is a larger version of one of my all-time favorites, the AP201, which is an Asus Prime case. This is the AP303. Not sure why we had to add an extra couple of numbers in there, but this is essentially the same thing made a little bit taller. So the main, well, it's not compromise, the main design difference that you're going to get with this versus most cases, and it's not only that obviously it kind of looks a lot more minimal, but it's that the power supply goes here at the front behind this little bar. So this means that the case can still have a very large volume, but actually physically kind of be smaller essentially. In terms of the building area and the airflow that you're going to get for your components, they can maintain this while having something that's smaller. I think this is good, but obviously because this is going to be full size, you're probably going to put more in it, you're going to have more cables and things, so could this get messy? Potentially. Depends what you obviously are going to put inside it. So there's not actually masses of room around the other side. Let's see if you can see this. There's not actually like a very large cutout area here, so you are going to have to be careful if you're going to like put loads of different like adapters, loads of different like cable management boxes and like RGB hubs and things. This probably isn't the case for you. We've gone for a higher end build though, so it is going to be a good challenge, so we'll see exactly how this works out, but hopefully I will like it just as much as I did with the smaller original version. Something that does annoy me though, and Asus please change this, is that they've got this Prime text on the tempered glass. I don't know about you, I don't like that. I think it looks a little bit tacky. It takes away from the minimal look of the rest of it, but other than that, I really like the style, the pricing, and hopefully the airflow and thermals of this system. We do also get like this GPU sag bracket here as well, which is quite nice, but let's get this turned upside down, and then we can pick up our motherboard, and obviously being careful not to scratch it, just kind of line this up with this central hole like so. Screw it in with the ring-shaped screws, and then we can actually do things a little bit differently here today and install the power supply next, because obviously the more stuff you put here, the harder this is going to be to insert. Oh, has it got a door? No, it doesn't have a door, but okay, just these 2 screws, and then we can start to think, almost dropped that again, twice in one video. We can then start to think about our power supply, and this is obviously a higher end one, but once again, saving yourselves a little bit of money, cutting back. This one is from Montech, but you get 10-year warranty, 80+ gold, and is Cybernetics Platinum rated. So gold 1050 ATX3 should have everything that we need and is available for a good price. I quite like that it's silver. I think it will look quite good in here, actually. We then start to plug in all of our cables, including this 600 watt PCI Generation 5 connection. And then once you have made sure everything is nice and tight, you can park this just for 1 second, because in order to get this inside our case, there's this little caddy. So we do need to remove the front panel like that. It's completely toolless. And then you should find that there are some screws here for the PSU cage. Try not to get that one stuck, and then the whole thing should just come off nice and easily, look, and then your power supply is just going to go inside here. Do be aware though that obviously in terms of airflow, personally speaking, I think most people are going to be better off having this as an intake from the front, so you've got like cooler, cleaner air coming into it. But if you wanted to get creative for whatever reason and have it the other way, that's fine, but obviously be aware that you're going to get exhaust gases from the GPU, etc., going into this, which is obviously going to heat it up. So not necessarily so good. Bracket goes like that. This goes over the bracket. But let's grab our PSU screws that you get with the case, and then get that nice and tight. And then once you're done, you do get a few different places you can put this, 3 different hooks, I suppose, for this to go into, but I'm going to use the lowest one because that gives us the most space at the top in order to put a nice thick radiator. We can always move this later if we want, but obviously the lower down, the less room you have here to kind of cable manage all of your cables. But unlike the smaller version, I don't think this is going to be a problem. So let's grab this pass-through extender, get that connected, and then obviously do make sure that you have turned your power supply on, or again, the system isn't going to work. Oh, and of course, don't forget to replug this in with the screws. Do you remember when I said the silver was going to look good? The silver's going to be facing the front. Oh no, you can't really see it, can you? You can't really see it, that's fine. And I must admit that it does feel a little bit odd doing this now, but let's start our cable management for our power supply cables just by feeding them through to the other side. Yeah, and actually, to be fair, that doesn't look too bad at the moment, does it? We are going to put some extra fans down the bottom here as well, and this is one of the benefits of having this larger one versus the Micro ATX. There's just more room for kind of fans and cables and graphics card all to be in the same place. But let's do what my dad always told me not to do and follow through and actually start to plug in these cables now. We can do the same with the CPU connections here as well. Certainly a lot easier when there's no radiator in place. And then I know that you guys doubt me, but fear not, I have been cable managing as we've gone. It's actually very easy in this case with what we've got, but again, don't go putting too much inside there, because then I don't think this will be true. But you can see we've got these Velcro straps here, so I've just managed everything, and these pre-done cable ties are actually quite useful just for like clipping a couple of extra cables in, like I've done here with the CPU. But the reason that I wanted to show you this side is, of course, because we have to plug in all of our case connections. So we've got our power, we've got USB 3? Yes, 2 USB 3 and then our USB-C as well. The reason I hesitated with USB 3 is because we actually did a Corsair case that wasn't that much cheaper than this only a couple of weeks ago, and this actually had USB 2 on it. Unbelievable. Check out Editor Carl's awesome review in the top right corner of your screen. And then again, feed them through, plenty of holes actually. I am liking this case. I'm a happy boy so far. Then I'll flip this back over so you can see. We've got our USB-C just below that power connection alongside the USB 3. HD audio is at the bottom left. And then finally, our power connection is up here at the bottom right. And then, oh, now comes the bit that I hate, which is the radiator. It should be okay, because it's been pre-installed and we're actually all set up and ready to go. So hopefully it will be fine. We're going to start by keeping in this orientation, and then this should just lift off like that. And then when we get our radiator, hopefully this should just drop into position, but there is a little bit of a potential clearance issue with this cable, but let's find out. Is this going to be a problem? No, actually that looks absolutely fine, doesn't it? Loads of room. And even if you do want to maintain access to all of this front panel I/O, I suppose. I'm struggling for words today. The connections at the top of the board, they're still accessible actually, even with this radiator. I think 360 is the largest that you can do. I don't think you can go 420, but you could put 140 fans at the top. Oh, and actually, as I screw this in, it does look as if you wanted to, you could take this top panel off and then put it on the radiator and then put the whole thing back in. But because this case is quite small, personally speaking, I think this is absolutely fine the way it is. But right, okay, that is in. So now comes the other half of the equation. And so far, this has been very, very easy. Actually, again, getting this down. So remember, we did our test fit, still applies here, plenty of room, plenty of access, but obviously we do need to remember to install our thermal compound, which is just the bridge, if you like, between the two components, so the heat will actually travel across the gap rather than getting stuck by air. But there, I'm just putting like a big blob in the middle. There we can pick up our cooler, and with the tubes ideally facing downwards, I'm gonna line that up over the screws, and then just by hand, get it so it's caught on every single screw hole. Then with the screwdriver, screw down in a cross pattern until it is nice and safe and secure. And then, ladies and gentlemen, you'll start to have a heavier system, but a system that is actually almost complete now. I do want to add those extra fans down the bottom. It's not essential. If you're following this guide with something like a 5060 Ti, 5070, I would say you're probably not going to need them, but they will make the thing look better and give you better airflow. But obviously 5080, I think, is definitely going to help to give this a little bit of extra airflow. But you can see that radiator was incredibly easy to get installed. You just have a couple of cables to plug in. So we've got our addressable RGB and our fan connection for the cooler, and then we actually have our fan connections as well for the fans. This board's quite helpful because we have an all-in-one pump header by the pump. Next to that, we can plug in our fans to CPU fan, and then sorry if the camera work gets a little bit shoddy here, but these little, ow! The ones you don't want to stab with your finger. These little white connections here, the addressable RGBs with 3 pins, you just want to plug in here and daisy chain this to the fans. Next up, we are going to almost hit ourselves in the face with some fans. These are some reverse blades, hence the R. These are basically some of the cheapest mainstream decent fans you can get. If you do want to save money, look at like ID cooling, something like that, but I wouldn't necessarily advise going for like super high-end fans down the bottom here, because it's a great way to spend a load of money and not necessarily get anything in return versus something that's cheaper. These are going to be daisy chainable RGB, so it will make a little bit of mess, but I think this case can handle it essentially, and the reverse blade just means that you can see the attractive bit of the fan rather than just having the rear and the frame. And these are literally just going to mount down here at the bottom. Oh, which means turning this upside down, doesn't it? But Corsair, you don't even give us the nice screws. Come on, you've invented your own proprietary screw that's so much easier to install, and yet you haven't put them on your fans. That's poor effort, that is. Once those are screwed in though, we should be able to daisy chain some of them together. You can see we've got these short cables pre-attached. I mean, this fan's literally next to a connection, so let's try that first. And then fast forward roughly around about 5 minutes or so, because it is quite fiddly. Like, it's not difficult, but there's just like labels and things you've got to hide, and you don't want this to look like a right absolute mess. But round the back, actually, still looks quite clean, right? A little bit of cable management, a few cable ties to go, but actually you can see nice framework there. The last piece of the puzzle is actually going to be to insert our graphics card. Always the most exciting bit, and obviously the 5080 is an absolutely insane GPU. Let's go with all of the good stuff. Until you talk about, obviously, the absolute best, the 5090, which realistically is going to be so much more expensive than this, then you would have to have some specific use or just endless cash in order to make that worthwhile. This is pretty much the best of the rest. You can still access all of those really awesome NVIDIA features, things like DLSS Super Resolution 4.5, DLSS 5 in the future, that went down well. Frame generation, multi-frame generation, if you want to use it. It's not really for me, but in some instances it's absolutely going to be worth using. And then obviously loads and loads of raw horsepower. The thing for me though is the fact that because the 5070 Ti exists, and believe it or not, yes, it still does exist, that also carries the same 16GB of VRAM configuration. It pretty much means, I think, for most people, if you want to go for kind of like extreme high end, the 5070 Ti is what personally I would go for. I think that actually makes a whole bunch more sense. This is one from Palette, but actually on PC Part Picker, when I did this build, it looks as if the Asus Prime, which was quite funny because it's a Prime case, the Asus Prime pretty much looks like the best bet. I couldn't even find this one, but it's a nice looking card, this one. It's simple but effective, and I think it's going to go really nicely in here. So let's put this to one side, grab our screwdriver, and then we can actually remove the slot covers from number 2 and number 3. On some cards, it's going to be the 4th one as well, if it's extra thick. And I will say as well that you do also get it looks like a vertical GPU mount bracket inside the box, but not the rest of the gubbins. So if you did want to vertically GPU mount your case, you are going to have to buy extra stuff. You can't do this in the out-the-box config. Let's go for our top slot. You'll know when it's in, because it will make a nice audible click like that. You will obviously need to make sure that you get it screwed at the back, or the whole thing's going to be loose, and that would be bad. Oh no, don't tell me that's not long enough. No! If only there weren't a load of fans and a graphics card already in the way. But otherwise, it is just a case of grabbing your cable, look. We've got plenty of slack now, look, so this should just insert into the graphics card at the top. Do make sure that it is fully inserted all of the way. Again, you don't want to mess around with these cables whatsoever. And then, if you haven't already done it, just give your graphics card a screw down till it is safe and secure. And then the very last piece of the puzzle is to hide the horrible, ugly power supply. Fit it down, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we have, hopefully, our completed and fully working gaming PC. $3,000. It gets you a lot, but simultaneously, obviously, it gives you loads of flexibility, loads of choice. You're not trying to cut every single corner. I mean, this is just over $3,000, but if you can get a deal on the RAM, I think it would be under. This was about $3,020, I believe, plus obviously all of your applicable taxes and things. But the point I want to make is that you could have a much bigger, much nicer case. You could have an LCD on the cooler. There's so many things you could do here, but obviously if you're trying to maximize performance while still having something that looks and hopefully performs amazingly well, I actually think this is pretty much as good as you're going to get. There's always some changes that we're going to make, right? But ultimately, I'm really happy with how this has turned out. Shall we see if it works? Oh, and yes, I probably should say, I'm not actually expecting this to work because we have picked a motherboard that has USB BIOS flashback. So remember, this is a new CPU. This motherboard came out before the CPU existed, so it won't necessarily know what this chip is. I can't remember what BIOS I've got on here, but it probably won't boot. Let's find out. Moment of truth time. And we've got some action, loads of lovely RGB. I'll come around so I can actually see it. It's not going to obviously be the most blingy thing in the world, but I think this is a great blend really between something that looks very minimal, very tasteful, but then still has lots of customizability. I mean, it just doesn't really have those front fans, which is why it looks a little bit different to a lot of normal cases or so. Oh wow, there we go. It does work. But if you want to follow this guide, find this video in the top right corner of your screen to show you how to put the latest BIOS file on. It's super simple, and this video will walk you through everything. But there we are, look. It looks like we have a fully working system. I wasn't expecting that. But anyway, let's press F1 to get into the BIOS. You'll then be greeted with a screen that looks like this. Helps if you turn your mouse on, and the first thing we want to do is to enable our RAM overclocking. So we want to go to where it says Expo and select this to enabled. Then I always come down to where it says QFan control, and you can use one of the pre-configured profiles, so standard, silent, turbo, full speed, but I pretty much always set it to manual, and then just customize it just so that it doesn't ramp up until it actually needs to. This is not in any way about not having your fans spin when they, as I say, when they need to, when your system gets hot. This is just about making sure that when you're doing some light gaming, sitting on the desktop, something like that, you can't hear your system because it really doesn't need that level of cooling. Once they're all tuned though, you can save and exit, and you do this usually just by pressing escape, not on this motherboard apparently, or just by pressing save and exit, which in this case is F10. I think actually I might be making that up. Ignore me, it is F10. Escape is usually leave your motherboard without making any changes. But you probably find that when you restart it, it does this, which is to take a little bit of time to reboot, and this is just doing some memory training just to make sure that your system is stable. It's not going to crash when you actually need it to work or you're gaming or something like that. But assuming it does come back, you should be greeted with either a window screen if you're using an existing SSD with a prior Windows install, or if you follow this guide in the top right corner of your screen, then you get a copy of Windows onto your SSD. It's super simple and really doesn't take very long at all. But it looks like our system has calmed down a little bit. We've got our boot screen, so give us like an hour, couple of hours to get some games on this, and we'll be right back. And indeed then, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, all set up and ready to go. And I do listen to you, that person that commented, sorry I can't remember your username, where's Warzone? We haven't seen it in ages. Well, here it is, just for you. Oh, and of course, because I'm so marvelous at my job, I actually forgot to record the gameplay. So we're gonna start this little voiceover bit again, but don't worry, you haven't missed anything. We've just dropped down and we got our first kill, which was nice. So we're running this at 4K. We are using DLSS set to performance in order to get here. Now, before anyone goes, oh, that's cheating, I wouldn't do that. Seriously, I've talked about it before, I'll talk about it again. DLSS Super Resolution, especially this, which is the latest Transformer model, you can actually upgrade this in the NVIDIA app to 4.5 if you want, especially in performance mode like this. You may well see a difference in terms of image quality, but I'm using this just at the standard 4 for now, but it looks absolutely fantastic. You honestly wouldn't know unless you were freeze framing it, looking into the distance and doing anything really that basically isn't gaming. You absolutely would not be able to notice that this is not an absolutely jaw-droppingly good looking game with jaw-dropping sharpness, he says, as he finds someone. Can he get the job done? Here we go, we're gonna find out. Yes, boom, all right, happy with that. Okay, that's 2 for me. I'll take that. And I will add that this isn't exactly what I would call real-world settings, because this is running at absolute max, so this is extreme, granted with that DLSS super resolution. So I think most people will be running this at 1440, or you'd probably set this to high settings or something like that. It's nice to be able to show off what this system can do and the fact they do have this capability here, really. But I suppose it is a cake and eat it situation, right? Because even if you do want to play at high refresh rate and have all of the details, you can, but just because you can doesn't necessarily mean that you should. But yes, I'd say in terms of real-world performance, this is pretty much as bad as you are going to get, which is awesome. But let's see what happens now if we turn this down a little bit. Find where it says quality, and we'll set this to ultra. We'll then hit apply, come out of this, and I'm not expecting massive differences, and indeed it hasn't really changed all that much, maybe an extra 10 to 15 FPS, something like that, sometimes more, sometimes less. So it's nice to have a little bit extra smoothness, because obviously you do want to max out your monitor's refresh rate natively rather than obviously using frame gen to get there, which is fine in a single player game, but certainly not in a multiplayer. But obviously every little helps, as Tesco would say, around about 135. But obviously in terms of actual performance, once we change this to 1440p, set the DLSS to balanced, and then come out of this, this is when I would expect an absolutely massive difference. And indeed, you can see we jumped up by about 30 or 40 frames a second now to about 180, 190, which is well beyond have your cake and eat it. This is, I wouldn't call it esports. Obviously, you're looking for like the highest frame rate you can possibly get. But I mean, who watching this is actually going to complain about having 180, 185 FPS? And of course, because we're using that 9850X3D, we're giving the system the best chance possible in terms of CPU frame rate as well. So even if you were to throw in a 5090 or realistically probably upgrade this graphics card in a few years to something that comes out that's even better, it's not necessarily going to be holding you back. It depends on the title and the settings and everything, but it's certainly going to give you the best kind of base load really in terms of CPU performance. And of course you could always upgrade the CPU as well, because it's AM5, so as long as something better comes out for this socket, then you can get more performance into the future as well. Try doing that on Intel. Oh, and hang on a second, I realised we haven't even done our peel yet. We jumped straight into the gameplay, didn't we? And we haven't talked about the way that the system looks. Personally speaking, it's right up my alley. I do think that my personal rig looked better. This was an M80X rig, but you've got that wood on the front that I really think does kind of take it to the next level. However, if you do want something that has this lovely metal front on it, you do want it to be quite minimal, but then just still be able to pack it with an absolutely ginormous graphics card and fundamentally not spend an absolute arm and a leg on the case and still get everything that you need, I think this has worked out really well. I mean, those extra fans will be, what, an extra £35 or so. So on top of this, you're looking at about 125, 135 pounds or so for the case and the fans, and then obviously you have to add everything in there as well. But you've still got that customizability. You can still set the RGB to how you want, but I understand that it's not going to be to everyone's taste. But thankfully, if you're spending $3,000 on a system, you should be able to have the budget to find a case that suits you more. But let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think this is attractive? Is it minimal? Or is PC Centric dead wrong? But from one multiplayer title that's been around for quite a while to another that's only really just come out in the last year or so, this of course is some Arc Raiders. And this is way more attractive actually than Call of Duty, yet in my experience it actually tends to run a fair bit better. Now Warzone is hit and miss, it depends on the version, depends on the updates, depends on the system, whereas this is pretty consistent actually. So we're running this at 4K DLSS performance, everything at epic, but we do have the ray tracing set to static rather than the full dynamic. So technically you can get a game that's a little bit better looking than this, but I think this is probably as high as most people will want to go. In terms of utilization, you can see that our graphics card is pretty much being fully utilized, around about 99%. You probably are going to get a couple of dips here and there, but nothing that is really going to imply that you need to get a better CPU. Obviously you can't, but again in the future you won't necessarily feel the need to upgrade because you've already got something that's fantastic now. Temperatures and things, well, we're looking about 65 degrees and 72 on the GPU and CPU respectively. The system is not the absolute quietest I've ever put together, but obviously it's a high wattage system and you could probably do a fair bit more tuning because I think it's the fans down the bottom that are spinning up perhaps more than they need to. And I mean, if you look at that GPU temp of 63 degrees, clearly we're not struggling for thermals or anything like that. But one of the compromises that you have on this case pretty much is twofold. It's quite a fine mesh, so the holes themselves aren't actually that big. If it was a more open case, you probably would get, well, you would get better temperatures. But then also because you've not got any fans on the front and there's not really anywhere to put them. I mean, I think you probably could make it work, but you've got a load of PSU cables and there's not strictly support for it, but I think you could make it work. It's not necessary as we can see, but obviously the more open a case is going to be, then the lower the temperatures and potentially the lower the noise and things will be. But yeah, around about 150 FPS with these settings. But let's kind of stress this out a bit now. We change our DLSS to quality, and then let's turn our ray tracing all the way up to high. And you can see that obviously that will drop the frame rate to around about 100 to 120 FPS. And you can notice a fair difference actually. You might be thinking, well, it's over 100 FPS, so it's still going to be super smooth. And it is, but especially with a mouse and keyboard, that is going to be a noticeable difference, especially with a multiplayer title. But this is now pretty much going to be the worst case scenario, but I would use the settings that we had before. But let's see what happens if we set this to 1440p. Exact same settings now. Well, as you'd expect, we've now gone up to around about 160 to 170 FPS. The reason I kind of want to show you these settings is because this is more what you might be aiming for if you have a 1440p 165Hz display, but I would advise turning the ray tracing off because, again, for a multiplayer title, it's not going to make any real difference to your enjoyment of the game, and it is going to mean that you're going to drop below that maximum refresh rate. But yes, around about 165 to 170 FPS. But right, ladies and gentlemen, how about we properly now take things up a notch with this, some Battlefield 6, the game that is my nemesis and foe. And this is not at all because I don't like this game, it's because it's actually almost impossible to stay alive long enough to walk you guys through the performance. But we're going to do our best. So this is currently running at the Overkill preset, which obviously is very, very intense and once again isn't exactly necessary for a multiplayer title, but we like to stress test this game. Can I stay alive? No, of course I can't. We're running at around about 100 to 120 FPS. We are running this at 4K, but we're using DLSS 4.5 now at performance in order to get there. So you can still see around about 100 to 120 FPS. It's not bad, but once again, it's not what I would call competitive settings. But the thing that I really do want to draw your attention to, really, is the fact that in every single test so far, I don't think, well, we probably have, but not that I can remember anyway, I don't think we've really had any spiking or any weird hitching or stuttering on this frame time graph at all. And a lot of this is not only because we have a really powerful graphics card, but because that CPU is really, really good and really important, because it just means that anytime the game does make a CPU call and there's a lot going on, a lot of explosions or just a lot of game logic or something like that, the PC is able to handle it without the whole thing kind of just cocking up, right? Which is a really nice thing to see. But I know a lot of you will be saying a really nice thing to see would be a high frame rate. So let's change this now to the high preset. We keep everything else the same, so still 4K, still using that DLSS upscaling, and you can see that the frame rate has increased now by about 20 FPS, maybe slightly more, 25 or so. So we're now looking at about 130 at 150 FPS. So I think for most people this may well be the sweet spot. Once again, obviously it does depend on the monitor that you have. If you're running on a TV, then you're probably using HDMI 2.1 and you're getting 4K 120. So for consoles, this is pretty much as good as you're going to get, right? But it still isn't as high as some people would like. So let's change this to 1440. We'll set our DLSS to balance, but keep it at 4.5. And then when we come out of this, he says, trying to find somewhere to spawn. We can see that the frame rate has, of course, jumped up. Not like a crazy amount, not as much as you'll find in some other titles, actually, but we are now looking at around about 160 to 170 FPS or so. But of course, this is a massive map. There's a lot going on, right? So it is going to see a fair amount of variance, again, depending on where and when you are in the title. But once again, if you're playing this on a 165Hz display, I don't think you're going to have any issues with this whatsoever. But I will draw your attention, actually, to the fact that in terms of our GPU load, this has now dropped a little bit to about 92 to 95%. So sure enough, that 90... can't think for a second, that 9850X3D is actually kind of holding back the system ever so slightly here. But to be fair, this is like a community map, so maybe it's not as well optimized as some others would be. But it's still a very, very impressive experience, and I think you guys are going to absolutely love the performance that you can get from this machine. But right, ladies and gentlemen, now comes the real moment of truth. I haven't looked at the frame rate yet. This is going to be the most demanding test yet. This is the latest Resident Evil. Everything is set to max. We're using DLSS set to performance, but we've got full path tracing. Everything, as I say, cranked to the max. What frame rate are we going to get? And at the very start of the game, this is a very, very attractive title that I've been distracted. I mean, you can absolutely notice just how good that lighting looks. But obviously, in terms of performance, you are going to be losing performance. So we're now getting around about 56 to 60 frames a second. Now, we can increase this with some frame gen. Obviously, this is going to affect the latency though. So if you're sensitive to this thing, and personally speaking, I am, so I probably wouldn't turn this on. But if you wanted to kind of do what NVIDIA do and cheat, you can go into the settings, and under advanced, can we turn it on in-game? Yes, we can. So we can go frame gen, and we have NVIDIA DLSS 2X. And then when we come out of this, has this made a difference? Yes, it has. We're now looking at around about 100 to 110 FPS. Now, obviously though, do bear in mind, again, that this affects the latency of the game. So the responsiveness of what you're actually moving around and seeing is going to be less, but then what your eyes see is going to be a lot smoother because we're now kind of generating some frames and the monitor just actually has more to show, essentially. So for a game like this, actually, it's probably not going to be a problem. I'd still rather have slightly more frame rate to start with before we turn this tech on, but this is exactly the sort of title that it was designed for, really. Something that's single player, something that is slower paced, and something that you just will be able to appreciate all of the details of in the first place, really. So this is not bad, and this is what I talked about at the start of the video when I said that obviously path tracing is going to be very difficult. That's kind of what the 5090 is like, the real creme de la creme of, really, when it comes to delivering performance. But this is not going to say that you're not going to get that with the 5080, because you're absolutely going to be able to play even at 4K with these settings. I mean, the frame rate does drop down in cutscenes, so do be aware of this, but obviously you can get more optimized settings just by turning some of the other things down potentially as well. Kind of depends, you know, what you're aiming for, really. But yeah, I think you could absolutely make this work. But the very last thing I wanted to do is actually talk about overclocking, because if you recall, I said that this is quite a good overclocker. So if you have a look at our GPU 2, you can see we're currently running this at around about 2865 megahertz, but I know this card can run stably at around about 3100. That doesn't mean yours will, and my stably is not the same as your stably, but I think we can actually get some extra performance here. So let's skip this. Let's find ourselves a nice static scene look, and you can see our frame rate's around about 132 FPS. Can we improve this? Well, we're using MSI Afterburner anyway for this overlay. So let's open her up. I'm gonna add plus 100 to the memory, 250 to the core. Gonna hit apply, and obviously we're gonna keep an eye out for artifacts or anything like that, anything wrong with the image, but you should now see that our clock speed's around about 3082 for our GPU 2, and sure enough, we've got a little bit extra frame rate. It was 132 FPS, we're now looking at 140. Some of this obviously is gonna be frame gen, but again, it's boosting that native, yeah, native's the right word, the raw frame rate, and then frame gen is obviously going on top of that. But you can see that it does actually make a fair amount of difference. This is not necessarily gonna be something that you're going to notice and be able to be like, oh, well, clearly that's A and that's B, but if it's extra free frame rate, as long as you're happy to do the overclocking, I would take full advantage of it. Just make sure you are running settings that you're happy with, that obviously do run stably. If you want to see how to overclock a graphics card, you can find our video in the top right corner of your screen. But otherwise, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this though. Let us know in the comments section below. Please smash the like button if you've enjoyed this video. It really helps out. And if you're not already, please get subscribed. It massively helps out a channel like this, so please get subscribed. And of course, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this video, then as always, you can find it listed down below with our affiliate links.
And while you're down there, why not check out PC Specialist? PC Specialist creates some of the very best systems out there, with meticulous cable management coupled with rigorous testing to guarantee stability and optimal performance. This system is the Eclipse R7 Ti. It features an AMD 9800X3D and NVIDIA RTX 5070 Ti, and it is the dream gaming powerhouse. Learn more and find your perfect gaming PC without the fuss of building with a link down below.
But thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.